Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I was browsing X a while back when someone posted this link, and I noticed the second and third posters mentioned a place on the astral they called Mallworld where you could buy anything you want for a price. I am wondering if anyone has ever been there and how to find it. I would also be interested if anyone actually bought something there.
Mallworld is a controlled space. You might catch unwanted attention if you act too aware of things while they're asked strange questions. I tried to learn to lucid dream and astral project off and on for years, with only the occasional sort of lucid dream and some vibrations to show for it. This past year, I learned about affirmations, started one, and saw progress in months. I now regularly have lucid dreams and even astral projections in the morning. Sometimes I get multiple dives in a morning, and for 2 or 3 mornings in a row. For 3 months I said out loud I am an excellent lucid dreamer and astral projector. I can reach the void easily and transition beyond it easily. Once a day, and then for 3 months after I said nothing and lived my life. During that downtime was when the spontaneous lucidity and projection started. I've kept up the 3 months on, 3 months off affirmation since and have been getting better at inducing them and controlling them.
I'm probably in some kind of mall world at least once a week. There are multiple malls just like in the waking world, but I will have recurring dreams about the different ones for some reason. Also sort of unrelated, I used to work at my local mall at a Bergner's. I worked in the stock room unloading trucks and odd maintenance things and stuff like that. Sometimes I would be the only stock person on a shift and it would be really slow, so I'd kind of wander around in the back. I was crawling around some old merchandise looking for something, and I saw there was a gap between where the walls meet. I scrambled over the boxes and looked, and there was more space between the walls and an area that didn't seem to fit the layout of the store that I knew. I couldn't figure out where it went, so I squeezed between the opening through these 2 walls for about 10 feet. When I got to the end, there was this whole big space. A walled-off restaurant straight out of the 80s. The booths and kitchen were all still there. It was bizarre because there was no other way in and out that I could find except that narrow wall space. It was super creepy because the fluorescent lights were still there, buzzing and flickering with what I think was the mercury vapor condensed and rolling around in the tubes. I felt like I had slipped into some kind of pocket reality, but it kind of weirded me out. I thought it would be cool because I could slack off or take a nap and no one would find me, but then I thought, what I'd known one ever finds me, and I got out of there.
It's good to hear others having these Mallworld dreams. Mallworld is highly reoccurring for me. No mall is ever the same or resembles any mall I've been in. Structure and feeling, I know I'm in a mall. There have been times where I have that aerial eye in the sky, projection, director, viewing Mallworld like an RPG, I don't play, then bam, suddenly I'm in a room that leads to a Rocky Mountain waterfall with people I haven't talked to since I was teenager. Usually when I'm in Mallworld, I'm on autopilot cruise mode, chill, stuff happens around me, bartering, fires in showcases, crows flying around, climb the rafters, wealthy, mid, and poor families living there, the sun threatens to bash the glass ceiling. I never buy anything, I take it if I need it, or somebody gives me something like a piece of paper that says, Kira, but in Enochian, I don't speak it. The latter seems to happen a lot. It is like this purgatory place of nostalgia. I keep a dream journal, a lot of this is spliced. But I'm a regular there at Mallworld.
Anyone actually bought something there? If so, what was it?
I've shopped there before, but more often I end up goofing around in the arcades playing the games. I always end up disappointed because trying to play Dance Dance Revolution or Pump It Up, the step charts seem randomly generated and are laggy as hell, plus the dance pads are way bigger than they're supposed to be. That seems to be the case on every unit in Mallworld arcades from what I can tell. I only remember maybe 40% of Mallworld dreams in any detail more than I remember non-Mallworld, but things I remember buying. Yoruzing Yatsura manga translated. This was well before the modern re-release. Looked like the modern re-release though, oddly from an indie bookstore in one mall and from a Barnes & Noble in another. Though that Barnes & Noble has gone out of business since then, I watched their going out of business sale evolve over the weeks of dreaming. N64 games, including some rare made-up prototypes from a Babbage's in Mallworld. A tiny metal coin bank with electric-type Gen 1 Pokémon all around it, from a Kmart connected to a rare mall in Mallworld. This flipped me out because when I woke up and went downstairs, somebody had dropped by and brought it to me after finding it at a secondhand store. I'd never seen it before in my life, and it's like I was able to manifest it from Mallworld. Never been able to do anything like that since though. Has anybody else managed to spawn at the mall nearest the forests? There's a dark corner on the far end of one wing next to an escalator that has a bizarre ancient Egypt-themed dollar store. I've been there 3 or 4 times now. If you manage to escape that mall, there's a trolley that takes you on the rural roads around the forest, and that leads to several sprawling antique malls that are always the same whenever I visit, to a frighteningly accurate extent. I've not been able to get there in a while, but it's my favorite.
You telling me there's more than one mall? I've never seen a trolley or anything though. My mall is just in a single circular clearing in the dense forest that seems to extend indefinitely around it. No clear roads or trails or anything.
Never bought anything, but I've seen the things in there. It seems like a ton of gadget shops, mostly with stuff that appears to be designed for some purpose, but what is it? I really can't tell. Imagine, for instance, if you had never cooked really and didn't know what a stand mixer was and saw pick related. You don't even know it's supposed to be a kitchen thing. Just a weird shaped object with various attachments and knobs. The mall sells endless amounts of stuff like this. Never seen anything recognizable or that I personally would want.
Really? That's odd. In my experience, everything is a sensible real item, though I don't think they always exist outside of Mallworld directly. I certainly believe you, though. I laid out the things I've actually bought in my previous post, but other things I frequently run into. Claw machine, redemption games throughout the wings and in arcades. They dispense normal junky toys. You can win them. The bookstores, media stores have books, records, CDs, magazines, etc. They have titles and authors and such, and generally make sense, just randomly generated I suppose. Generic mostly. The rare game store has mostly real video games, with some that don't exist but make sense, like Pokemon RPGs for the N64. The convenience, dollar stores have off-brand household items and everything they normally do in malls, with the exception of the weird Egyptian-themed one that sells mostly posters, prints of gods, goddesses, papyri. The food courts serve food, and it fits the themes. My favorite thing I keep running into is this unnamed Chinese food restaurant that's insanely dark inside save for the lighted menu and some neon signs. It's a great spot to chill. There are adult stores like Spencer's in most. They're dark, black interiors mostly, and sell weird novelties, pop culture junk, and cool lighting, lamps, toys. The clothing stores sell regular clothing, but I usually ignore them, for whatever reason. Sometimes I'll look for something in my size if a display piece catches my attention, but I never find it. There are many malls, in my experience. I'd say a 50/50 chance between a returning mall and a new one, each time. It's possible they're all connected somehow, but they don't seem to be in my experience. Most of them are finite, but some seem to go on forever. It seems random which you spawn in. Returning to one you'll find it's exactly as you left it, though minus some store turnover.
What kind of folk populate your malls?
Mostly just normal people, NPCs that look roughly like the distribution of people you'd see in a mall, I guess. Many of the malls are nearly deserted, though. The very first time I was in Mallworld through my dream got invaded by somebody who then locked down that mall and attempted to kill me. It ended with me destroying their astral body by using the military surplus store shit in that mall against them. I later met a person in real life with a different personality. Apparently because the old one had been killed in the encounter. They remembered the entire thing, though, and recounted it to me without me telling them first and looked exactly the same, which was what tipped me off initially. That whole saga is what made me take Mallworld seriously. It's surreal to see other people talking about it now. This was like 8 years ago.
Mallworld is a collection of screen memories, simulations that aliens utilize on human victims for their programs and abduction procedures. I distinctly recall having a few dreams in which my consciousness was able to bypass the Mallworld simulations and instead I saw something else. Same probably applies for some liminal space dreams as well, especially those that take place in underground tunnels, indoor pool areas, hotels, giant bathrooms, hospitals and doctors' offices, aquariums, etc.
This is what I want to get to the bottom of. Where are these places? Who created or creates them? Why do we go to these places?
A variety of reasons, I would think, but it seems as though it mostly comes down to these 2 factors: to test, challenge, or monitor an individual's or even a collective group's behavior, decision-making process, emotions or responses in certain events or situations, though apocalyptic dreams are much more common in this regard. To distract the human's consciousness while they are performing procedures or experiments on them. Going by numerous experience reports, these simulations are often utilized as a sort of mental cover-up for medical, surgical, or psychological procedures. In weirder cases, they even deal with the astral realm or the soul, such as swapping an abductee's consciousness into a cloned body. In my opinion, from what I've read, learned, and heard, the entities primarily utilize the apocalypse dream simulations as mental fortitude tests and training scenarios, and the Mallworld simulations as mental distractions, like the equivalent of getting sedated in a lot of abduction accounts.
The most memorable and notable experience involved me wandering around a sort of crowded, pseudo-indoor water park shopping district, which eventually transitioned into a moderately crowded mega shopping mall as I continued walking forward. I recall visiting the same, or at the very least, similar-looking locations in previous dreams dating back in childhood, and I would say I was always rather lucid during these particular dreams, as if I innately knew these areas, and that I knew I was having a dream. Both areas were enormous. The indoor shopping mall district must have been 6-8 stories tall, and I was on the uppermost floor, walking along the edges, frequently stopping by to look down at the floors underneath me. The lighting shopping mall district was rather dim, and the overall layout of the area was circular or cylindrical in shape. Pic Related is a pretty decent and accurate portrayal of what the overall mall world looked like, as far as lighting and architectural design goes. The Central World Mall in Bangkok is another good comparison, but an unusual one, since I never lived in Thailand or knew that the mall existed to begin with until recently. However, unlike the indoor water park district, there was something about the shopping mall that innately triggered a profound flight response within me at the time. The dim look of the halls, the cold, crisp temperature, the sheer silence outside of the NPC group walking by or having a conversation about who knows what, brought back latent memories of abduction-related dreams I had in the past, as well as old dream scenarios that previously took place in that same mall world, such as being chased by a SWAT team or a group of security guards as a child. In that particular dream, my mind suddenly came to realize that these dreams were actually controlled simulations, and that I needed to find a way out as soon as possible. From that point forward, I went from casually walking around to frantically fast walking throughout the complex, trying to look for an exit door or a map sign, but to no avail. It was then that I also realized I never recall leaving the mall in previous dreams, and that they always seemed to take place at night, with the windows peering out into a black, voidless night sky. The more I thought about leaving the mall, the more I thought about leaving the simulation, is when things started to get weird. As during my frantic search for an exit, I gradually noticed that the NPC count within the complex began to dwindle, and that I couldn't find or walk back to the indoor water park complex where I initially started off. Some of the remaining NPCs were motioning instances of talking to one another, but no words would come out. When I tried to communicate with several of them, asking if they knew of an exit, they just shrugged it off with an eye roll, a rude glare, or went on walking, and from that point on they would refuse to respond or acknowledge me in any way at all.
The place is geographically huge though, very complex and not well marked, and at a certain point you get physically captured.
Yep, spot on. As mentioned in my previous post, it was often SWAT teams or policemen and security guards for my mall world situations. The SWAT teams were always large and by far the most panic-inducing. I even remember jumping off the 3rd or 4th floor and falling to my false death in a mall world dream as a kid. But the range of policemen and security guards would vary anywhere from one individual to small teams of 3 dotted across the complex. And yes, at a certain point, they would almost always successfully chase me down, capture me, and then the dream would black out from there. Or better yet, I would just wake up. And this is exactly what happened soon after I started asking too many NPCs for an exit door. A single security guard began chasing me down, outright exclaiming that I was being a nuisance or incredibly suspicious around fellow shoppers, and began chasing me down. Realizing that I was in a dream simulation, I figured I could outrun him without the worry of slowing down or getting tired, so I kept running and running. And that's when things started to get really weird. You know how draw distance works in gaming. How things and NPCs in the distance in front of you will suddenly pop out or materialize into your view as you approach them. Well, think the opposite of that. As I ran, I began to notice stores, people, objects, fountains, foliage, furniture, and architectural details gradually dematerialize in a blurry manner over time. First, the stores devolved into empty, boxed plexiglass rooms. Then the NPC shoppers disappeared altogether, along with the mall's sound and ambience, and then the security guard shortly after. At this point, I stopped running, but that's when sheer terror began to set in as I could help shake off this innate, instinctual feeling of their presence. That they knew and were in the process of tracking me down or ending the dream altogether. Regardless, my mind was in some sort of fight or flight animal state of sheer terror, and I continued trudging forward, though doing a mix of panic jogging and fast walking instead of sprinting. Even then, the complex's interior continued to deteriorate. The color of the walls transitioned from a chrome white to a dull, gray chrome. The night sky windows vanished, removing any traces of an outside world. The empty, blank plexiglass shops disappeared, were then replaced by said chrome walls. The interior's lighting began to dim a little bit more, yet everything was still quite visible without any discernible light sources. And then finally, the elevators and the escalators. All that was left was a dimly lit, giant, minimalist, endless atrium consisting of nothing but those 6 or 8 floors and countless metal bridges and staircases. I started giving up hope and breaking down, getting the feeling that they really were going to kill me, now that I somehow managed to bypass their simulation. I remember crying in fear, thinking it was over from there on out, until I noticed a sort of slim exit hall appear on my left side. I had the worrying knowledge that I was being set up for some kind of trap, but went through the hall anyway because at this point I had practically given up and subconsciously accepted what was coming. That I could sense their presence and that any form of resistance I would put up would be futile. I walked down the narrow, dim, chrome hallway and noticed how the shape of the hall was changing from sharp corners to a rounded archway. And from that point forward, I knew I was no longer in the sim, but in their craft instead. Eventually, the narrow hall led to a wide, open, dim, dark open void of an endless chrome room with no discernible walls, no corners, no beginning or end, except for a bright and open rectangular entrance on the opposite end, with a white light teeming from the entrance. So bright, you couldn't discern what was on the other side of that door. And at that point, I knew they had cornered me. I turned around and what do you know, 3 grays appear out of nowhere from the shadows, 3 or 4 feet tall, smooth, off-white, silicone-looking skin. Lithe bodies with stick-like limbs, completely naked but no genitals, and of course the abyssal eyes and blank, soulless stare they always give off. They get into a crouching position and attempt to surround me from all angles. Their movements are swift and graceful, but also give off a mechanical gait. I start freaking out, but the one in the center gives me the psychological stare down that's so prevalent in abduction scenarios, and then I'm just paralyzed in sheer terror for what feels like 10 seconds or so. For a brief moment, the mind stare coming from the gray in front of me is disrupted, and I can telepathically sense that its focus is on the entity walking out of the bright entrance. I'm given the chance to look behind, and what do you know? It's the silhouette of one of those tall gray types. I would say, somewhere between 5 to 6 feet tall, holding something in its elongated left hand, like a pointed device resembling a large needle. And within those several seconds, our minds managed to astrally communicate with each other. And in that brief moment, I could keenly sense the being was gold, stern and pissed that I had managed to bypass the simulation, and yet I managed to pick up this weird, underlying feeling that it was also somehow curious, impressed by my ability to do so. Then it pointed the device at me and I blacked out from there until I woke up in the morning. So yeah, sorry for the long story and if it comes off like a shitty creepypasta, but I wanted to provide a detailed account of one of these Mallworld simulation scenarios I experienced. And it's getting late for me, but I recommend everyone with an interest in the Mallworld phenomenon to research the abduction phenomenon if you can. There are too many similarities there to ignore.
Talking to the NPCs. You have to act absolutely as normal as possible around them. And do not try to approach the folks living in the trailers in the woods either. They don't want anything to do with you and will absolutely report you to the police the second they get questioned. Not helpful and probably actually harms your cause. I remember on a few occasions, or at least one I've revisited multiple times, I was escaping with someone else, a young woman, from the baths, out through the mall, and into the forest which I never made it past. I've posted before that for me the baths were mostly populated by semi-human creatures, mutants of a kind. Some nice looking, like elves or some such, but definitely off. Uncanny in a way. The girl I was escaping with was the only other, normal human, I found in there.
Always happy to see one of these threads, means I can post my schizo map of the mall and surrounding areas again.
As much as I want to believe, from what I've seen here there's no indication of any actual multiplayer dreaming. Endless branching locations are a hallmark of dream logic in general, and malls, schools, bathrooms, etc. are spaces most people have spent a lot of time over the years. It'd be one thing if we were all manifesting in the exact same location with the exact same stores. and layouts and having conversations in it we can recount in detail here when awake. But nobody can even agree if Mallworld is an infinite mall, a series of different malls, a paradise, a prison, a battlefield, or even if it's strictly multiplayer or strictly solo. Am I missing something, or is everybody just having occasional dreams about shopping malls their brain puts together from past experience, and then shitting themselves that OMG we're in the multiplayer online mall together? And before somebody says, but what about blank world, that's a different discussion. I've had dreams in the endless space baths and in endless schools and such, but never seen any indication it's linked to any mall dreams I've had. I love the idea here, but I think people are making connections that aren't there.
Maybe it's just fun to talk about and watch people seethe over.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.